Oh, good day there, a YouTube family, my cadre of adepts, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Al Bob. I am your griot, Sensei Al Bob, and a griot is a character in time and space that tells a story to the listener that gives a perspective of understanding. You know, you can see things happening right in front of you. People can tell you their belief. Oh, it's this. Oh, believe in Jesus. Believe in Muhammad. Believe in this. Believe in that. And even those folks who prescribe either convenience or belief um, brings forth a solidity of corruption and death. And the only way that the individual can relinquish themselves from this is by ascending their conscious free will to an understanding of what they're doing here. And that's what the griot does. The griot tells a story. And griot, that term comes from Africa, and I'm wearing an African shirt today. And I'm here at the library, which is a metaphor for knowledge. And I just want to, I don't know if I'll be able to do a live chat from the school in the next few days because John is again painting the floors, and my lungs are just healing, and to be in that environment to polyurethane and lead and oil-based paints, you know. And he said, you know, he's going to keep the windows closed because he's scared of insects. And you know, the windows have things called screens on them. Anyway, so I'll be up in the A-frame that gets no internet. So you know, the evenings I won't be able to do, but I'll come down to the library and do a live chat. So, you know, sometime between 12 and 2 the next few days, I'll be trying anyway to do a live chat. So, I wanted to start out with a couple of YouTubes that I've come. Chris Hedges, again, if you go to my playlist on my channel, you will find some pretty amazing things. And here's one that I think you might like.
The States is a global power with a firm hold on the world. But in the book you say, short of a sudden and widespread popular revolt, the death spiral appears unstoppable, meaning the United States as we know it will no longer exist within a decade or at most two. That's quite a statement. What makes you say that?
Because it's pegged to the end of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. That at that point, the empire becomes unsustainable and the economy goes into free fall. We can see what happened in the 1950s when the pound sterling, after the debacle of the Suez Crisis, was dropped as the world's currency. We are following all the familiar trajectories of dying empires. We're just ticking everything off the list, including that final, what historians call micro-militarism, when you carry out, in this case, the 17 years of warfare in the Middle East, these feudal, self-destructive conflicts, which is very difficult to extract yourself from. So yeah, on all levels, the America as we know it is terminal. When all of this will happen, and of course we're barreling towards another financial crisis, which even establishment organs like the New York Times, which had an editorial the other day on the removal of the Trump administration of the very tepid regulations imposed by Dodd-Frank. I mean, even that we read Paul Krugman, and I read Paul Krugman, still read the Times every day, and there are columns that he sounds like me. I mean, it's People are very worried, and then we
Yeah.
haven't even dealt with the issue of climate change.
The Dodd-Frank regulations that went into place post the financial crisis, the implementation of that has been slow, to say the least. How does that factor into your prediction that?
Well, we mishandled the 2008 global financial collapse.
How so?
We bailed out the banks to, anywhere between $4 to $7 trillion. We manufactured money, what Marx calls fictitious capital. We not only lent that money at virtually 0% interest, and there were central banks in Europe it was actually negative. They would pay you to take money. And we re-inflated the speculative economy. None of this money went towards infrastructure. China's reaction after 2008 was the opposite. None of it went to infrastructure projects. None of it bailed out the pension funds, the municipal funds, all of which dropped sometimes by 40%, not to mention all those people had IRAs. So the victims were left with nothing. The victimizers were bailed out. And that mechanism of re-inflating the market through 0% interest means that there's no plan B. That the next time around, they don't know what they're going to do. And then we have watched this massive tax cut, which over the next 10 years will bleed an estimated $1.5 trillion out of revenue from the US budget. And what have they done with the money? They bought back their own stock to inflate the value of the stock, which is why you have an overheated stock market, because that feeds the compensation. The compensation packages of CEOs and senior management is tied to the value of the stock. So it all looks pretty grim financially. And Dodd-Frank, we just saw the other day that they essentially removed controls for most banks. This was a very recent development, which has left most of the financial market now completely unregulated. So it's extremely dangerous. And when we get hit this time, I don't know how they're going to be able to respond in a kind of, I don't know how they're going to be able to reinflate the market. So, they can try and turn around and manufacture money again, but then you're flirting with hyperinflation.
So in your estimation, what would a world post United States as a superpower look like then?
Probably a multipolar world.
Explain.
So you have certain spheres of influence, China, for instance. Maybe in the Middle East, Turkey. Turkey would like to play that role. That's why they're messing around in Syria.
I'm surprised to hear you say Turkey.
Well, in the Middle East. Erdogan clearly has visions of recreating the Ottoman reach. Whether he can or not, I don't know. And if Turkey, of course, has got its own financial crisis at the moment. But yeah, I suspect a kind of multipolar world. There are some questions, and that is, what will be the power of international finance, which has been able to essentially seize control of economies quite effectively. You see it in India, for instance, countries like India, Pakistan, where people don't have control because of the IMF and the World Bank and Goldman Sachs. Greece is the kind of most egregious example of this. These states can't control their own economies, and so they revert to this politics of national identity, that economic decline is interpreted. Reagan and Thatcher kind of started this, is an assault against our national identity, against our values, and that's where you get the Islamophobia, the anti-immigrant stance, the rise of these right-wing proto-fascists in countries like Hungary or the United States. It's built out of that economic paralysis and political paralysis, because anytime a cabal seizes power, whether it's monarchical, communist, fascist, or in our case, corporate, the system seizes up. It no longer is able to implement what is fundamental to a democracy, as Karl Popper points out, and that's incremental or piecemeal reform. You can't staunch the assault, whether it's through austerity, stagnant wages, or in essence declining wages, and we go back to that, the borrowing at 0% interest. The money has to be.
Well, you get the picture, right? You see what Chris is talking about, And Chris has been talking about this for a good 20 years. I would suggest Chris Hedges, he has many books. He was, worked for the New York Times for 15, 20 years, and was a journalist for 30 years. And he has a very interesting point of view. And but what all these folks who have an interesting point of view is that they miss the real point of view. Is so what are we gonna substitute this irrelevant imperial corporate structure with? What are we going to put in its place? And I come from the thesis that the only true thing that exists is love's co-creation. And unless you are coming from that point of view, you're just going to keep coming from these, coming up upon these systemic, irrelevant belief structures like socialism, communism, fascism, capitalism, all the isms, you just are irrelevant. And all they do is serve to put on the altar of Baal a lot of blood, a lot of suffering, right? And that's why we individually have to, within the construct of our own lives, bring forth this in every day and every way, taking the piece of the earth and making it stronger through love's co-creation. Everything we do has to come from the construct of love. Everything. Everything we do, we have to put forth what's its effect on all our relations, Cutting down the rainforest in Brazil just to make a few pennies, a profit, in a very limited point of time and space, was catastrophic and suicidal. And, So, people who, go on and on and on about, their new car or their new shoes or their new anything, unless that new car or new shoes represents unconditional love for all our relations, there is a way to have physical dynamics of a social material structure, because we are in this sandbox of learning. Love's co-creation is the prime mover of all things. So here we are in this Luciferian material illusion. It's here for a reason. It's here for us to learn, and we're going to be here for however long it takes. So if everyone kind of said, I am going to not worry about how I'm going to pay my bills. I'm not going to worry about what some bully says. I'm not going to worry about, anything other than what is my reason to be here in perspective of my ability to manifest love's co-creation. I'm only here to do that. And I am here to do that for the betterment of all my relations, of the other, because I am the other. Now, the first part of my life, from 0 to 25, I was a little peanut, I was having experiences, and I was blessed to not be thrust into any belief structure, of my parents or the social strata, because I was naive to it and didn't understand it and didn't sense it or feel it. because the only thing I could feel was my grandmother's unconditional love. The only thing I could feel was the unconditional love of all of my mentors and masters that were around me, who were seeing in me as a piece of clay that they could sculpt into that thing that they, now in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, when I was a youngster, they were, saw upon me a guy who could, manifest that thing they wish they could have done. And I, that kind of personal gratification from an elder of stature, of gravitas, even though I didn't know what any of those things were, I could sense them because of anything. I was this electric being that could sense people's fields. Right? I was there to experience, and that's why we're here. We're here not to suffer, not to have great wealth. Or I've worked for, been around, been part of great power, great wealth, and I was happy just to get the crumbs and to do what I wanted to do and have that freedom of their flow, right? And so that first 25 years of being nurtured and sculpted, that was, what I liked, and when I was 20, when I went to Ireland and came into contact with the old crone and Archie, that was uh, an amazing experience, right? And it shamanically changed me, alchemically changed me, because first and foremost, the old crone was an alchemist. That's really what she was. Um, Archie, he kind of was all the above, and he hadn't mastered any of all the above. He was just all the above, and he was fine with that, because he was looking to serve. And I would say, if I was the old crone or Archie, I was Archie, because I'm here to serve. Whereas the old crone, the character of the Eternal One in the movie Doctor Strange, that was the old crone. But she, had Irish sensibilities rather than Eastern Asian sensibilities. And so that's where we are. We are, like I keep saying, we're at this window of great opportunity, right? We have about 18 months between now and whenever the next red flag comes down or the next economic collapse comes down. I mean, look, 9/11 happened, the biggest red flag since Pearl Harbor, was the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. So the neocons could start all these wars, right? And it's the kiss of death, as Chris Hedges says, of the end of the empire, And, as he sees it, and I could keep playing that, I, again, go to my playlist. I have a number of his videos up there, right? And I have a lot of different people's videos on my playlist that you should really go and see. And just, jump in. You don't have to watch the whole thing, but, you know, anyway. So, and they're all very different. They're not, they're not tribal. They're not representing any belief structure. I just pick people who were very passionate about what they wanted to show, and that and they were showing things that most people had never seen or know about. So, go take a look at my playlist. Get a little time, just go thumb through that. And so, let's see. What are you guys saying here? Yep. Thank you, Dragon. Motivation, dedication, evolution. Right? Motivation is what should the motivation be? What makes me happy? That's my motivation, right? Now, what makes me happy is, having $1 million, is me having all the material stuff, me being famous, me being a superstar, rock and roll star, any of those things, millionaire, big house, trophy wife, does any of that make me happy? No. What makes me happy, what I do in every day in every way, I bring the peace to the earth by going out in every individual I deal with on every level. A girl behind the cashier, a guy online. I try to engage and bring forth out of the people a realization to them that they are worthwhile, that they're important, that they make a difference in my life. When I make someone else happy, that's what makes me happy. So that's my motivation. My dedication. My dedication is my ascension of my conscious free will in co-creation with love. That's what I'm dedicated to. I'm there in service to love's co-creation, to manifest it to all our relations. And that is, in essence, the elevation of my conscious free will. I really choose to do this. Nothing's making me do it. No more, no stratus of status, no sense of inferiority or anger or hate or self-loathing motivates me to do this. No. That elevation is, in essence, the only reason why we are here. We are here to elevate our conscious free will out of the lower chakras into the upper chakras. And this little journey isn't just in this meat puppet. Once we graduate from the meat puppet experience, there are other. It's a hegemony. It's a layered thing. And that, if you go study theology as I have, go study culture as I have, go study psychology as I have, and the dynamics. And this is where it gets tricky, because everything that people look at as in science, again, is a misnomer. When I first took my first course in statistics, teacher started out, "Hey kids, welcome to statistics, and I'm going to teach you how to lie with numbers. And those of you who learn how to lie the best are going to be successful in the scholastic world." He said, "You have a choice at this class to choose to be a scholastic or a scholar. Scholar is those who ferret truth out for the well-being of society. Scholastics are those who lie for the business plan." And that's where we're at. And that's why you're here at Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Al-Bob. That's why you're my adepts. That's why there's, 300 of you or so. And that's, very interesting, because that's what it took to protect the Greek society from the invading horde of the Persians, and that's what we are. We are that crew of the Greek city-state of. I always forget who are the really badass guys of the Greek city-state. Starts with an S, like Superman. Anyway, that's us, right? And you know what was interesting about that city-state? It was a matriarchy. Women ran it, not men. The biggest badass Greek warrior state was run by women. And how do I know that? Well, I was part of a thing called the Harvard Colors Study. And what was that? It was studying gender. And they didn't want to say the gender study. And they were doing it for the Department of Defense through DARPA, because as they were bringing in the 80s, they were, had these, airplanes on aircraft carriers were costing, back in the day, a few $100,000. Then it was a few million. And then, the F-35 cost $1 million a pop, So they couldn't just put any behind the stick of that thing. And they found that women were way better at being a fighter pilot than guys because, first of all, their plumbing is different, right? They don't lose all their blood on their voice and their stick. They're internalized, so they don't lose. Men lose. Why are men so stupid? Because it's so easy for them to lose blood and oxygen in their brain. Women, not so easy. Plus, men are like, oh, I'm a badass. But once they get in the corner, they go, mommy, mommy. Where women kind of cry a little bit before they get in that cockpit, but once they get in there, they're going to kill you. So, I wish I could remember the name of those guys. Of course, need to flow is nature, one way or another. His flow is the flow psychology is similar to the deep psychology. Those who tend to hoard on natural but a learned process. Yeah, because our society is based on this concept of winner takes all. It's a zero-sum game. We live in a world of scarcity. No, we don't. We live in a world of abundance. It's the economic reason why economy cycles into one basket rather than overflow. All. Yep. Yeah. Instead of having a cornucopia where there's enough for everybody. Status, another weeding process to see how much sheepless will do. Bend over. Yep. Spartans. Thank you, Jane. That's what I was looking for. So the Spartans were actually a matriarchal society. They were their city-state up on that hill, and their front gate was down here, and you had to go up this inclined plane to go into the city-state. And when the warriors and all the women lined the, up above as the men went out to go off to represent and protect Sparta, and the women would throw flowers on them and say, come on back, honey, hey, I'll have a good time when you get back. And if they lost, the women showed their back to the men. And the next crew who was going to go out would be up there with their bows and arrows and kill the guys before they got up to the top. So, it was a big motivating thing to win as the Spartans, to represent, not so much win, but represent, because the Spartans were also not just, kick-ass warriors, but they were great diplomats. They were great negotiators. They'd much rather go in with the force, sit down and negotiate a good deal for both sides. And they realized the deal had to be good for both sides, not just one side. They just didn't go in there to destroy and obliterate, because what do you have after you destroy and obliterate? Nothing. Right? And so, but the Greeks were all about, they picked up on that. The Greeks used to cruise. I mean, in the early stages of the Greek and then Roman empires, their big armies would go into their lands they wanted to conquer, and they'd set up on the ridge, so everyone down in the conquered land could see their big army up there. And then the head generals and diplomats would come down to the king with a big, chest of gold and diamonds and bling, and hand it over to him. Say, hey, this is a gift we're giving you, dear king, as we show you our respect for you, right? And that army up there, we just want a slice of your pie. We don't want to take over. We don't want you to make you believe in our gods or our culture or anything. No. We just want you to represent, right? And we want you to take care of our interest in your neck of the woods. And for that, if you sign on to be part of the empire, we're going to leave that army with you. And you can use that army to go kick anybody's ass you want. Right? That's what the Romans did the first part of their successful element of their empire. But once they hired mercenaries, and that's what our military is, Blackwater, we don't have a draft. We don't have a citizen army. We have people who are desperate, have nowhere to go, and then they are, dipped, and whoever they were is obliterated, mind controlled, taken over, turned into killers. This whole thing with Julian Assange, that Friday there, they're not just bringing him here, but they want to basically get rid of the First Amendment. They're going to say, hey, yeah, of course he didn't steal that stuff. Manning did, right? But he published it. Well, that's the First Amendment. People have been, that's the job of Elise Lee. That's supposed to be the job of the Fourth Estate, to keep the politicians, the executives, and the courts feet to the fire. So you got to tell truth to it. So the First Amendment allows people to bring forth that kind of stuff. Now, the people in the army, they sign this whole thing saying they're not supposed to spill the beans. But if they hand that over to a newspaper guy, it's not supposed to be against the law for the newspaper guy to print that stuff. So we, the people, will know what's going on in our country, because the only way a country can work is if the population is well informed. And, the closest thing to information that the general public gets on every level of media is an advertisement. It's a form of propaganda. So, they're taking Assange to be thrown away or killed or gotten rid of, and to like step on the the newspaper guy's First Amendment right to inform us. Now, the other side of that, all the media has been purchased by the corporate state, the hidden hand. So 99% of whatever's out there is propaganda anyway. MSNBC, CNN, Fox, you name it. It's propaganda. Now, there are individuals like Chris Hedgens and Jimmy Dore and a few others that are kicking it out there. But they, again, you look at Chris. I love Chris, and the guy is smarter than a razor blade, sharper than a razor blade. But he has seen so much, and he is, I'm going to say, damaged isn't the right word, angered. Now, anger has a place, but it has to be, you have a fire. You've seen me making fires in a firebox. And, they, you put the fuel, you put the flame to it, and then you fan it. Well, the anger is the fan, it's the air, it's to build that fire. But you don't want to build that fire till it consumes everything. No, you want to build that fire to give motivation, right? And so Chris is doing that. But he does it in such a way that it's just, read his books. I mean, really should, because especially the one his little tour, and he goes into the areas in the United States that he calls not sanctuary cities, but cities that have been offered up on the funeral pyre ball. Camden, New Jersey, and West Virginia, and North Dakota, and Indian reservations. And that book it'll just break your heart to read that stuff. It's just unbelievable. Go look at Detroit, It's a city of 7 million people. Now, 400,000 live there. It's like, it was one of the major manufacturing areas, and there's nothing going on there except real estate, hipsterism. Yep. Those who tend to hoard. Hoard is an unnatural state, but it stems from fear, right? I mean, I was a hoarder. I mean, when I was, making a lot of money and I was traveling all over the place, I would stumble into really good deals, man. That thing, normally that cost, $40 a piece. They're selling it now for $1. I'll take 40. Anyway, so that's how you can become a hoarder. And now I'm not. I have nothing. I have a zero. I own nothing. You know, and to own nothing, to have nothing to lose is. And I've died so many times that even death isn't a big deal to me. Um, I am here because I've been given the opportunity in this life to ascend as far as I can. In gym class, you used to climb up that rope to the top. In sixth grade, we had a rope, and the top of our gym was like 60 feet up there. Be up there and we're climbing up there. And I remember the first time I got more than 3 feet up there, I just kept going. And my arms had gotten a little stronger. And I was going up there, and I was holding that rope between my legs. And as I was going up and like getting that rope between my legs, I was starting to feel this little. Oh, that kind of feels good. And I was at the top of the gym, like, ooh, yeah, ooh, I like that feel. Ooh, ooh. Ah. And Richard Lasco, who was our school chucklehead, um, he was at the bottom, and he wanted to go up that rope and go, ooh, ooh. And I had been up there, I don't know, 10 minutes already. And most people, got up 5 feet and gave up and pulled out. I was all the way at the top. I was 60 feet up in the air. And I wasn't thinking about, oh, I'm 60 feet up in the air. This is dangerous. I wasn't thinking of any of that. I was thinking, ooh, this feels good between my legs. Ooh, I like that feeling. Ooh, yeah. Ooh, ooh. First little, I had no idea what that was, but sixth grade was feeling pretty good. So I never played with myself, and here I was playing with myself. And what does Richard Lasco do? He grabs the bottom of the leg, says, get off of that, Al. And he went like, he sent this gigantic wave up the rope. And I was just up there, ooh, and didn't like hold it or anything, but that wave beat me right off. And 60 feet up in the air is pretty high. And I was, and I was moving in my brain, everything slowed down. This is when I really realized that time didn't exist, because when I kind of got flown off, I hadn't come to that exhilarating completion of that feeling between my legs. But now I was flying, and I was constructing the feeling of that really, ooh, between my legs and me flying through the air, right? And so I was flying through the air, and I wasn't scared. I wasn't worrying about anything like I was going to die, and I was just flying through the air. And as I tumbled, everything, I started whispering, and I saw people running away, not in front to like catch me, but running away because like they thought this was going to be really bad. And so even the gym teacher ran out of the freaking gym. The only person who stayed there was Richard Lasco. And he was looking up, and I saw his face going, whoa, I'd like to do that. Maybe when I go up in the Republican. That's the kind of chucklehead Richard was. He didn't think at 60 feet, Al's gravity, something bad's going to happen. Everyone else had horror and screams on their face, and they were like running out the gym door. Even the frigging gym teacher left. It was unbelievable. But I didn't think of that until later. And I'm flying, and so I see the floor coming up slowly, and I go, oh. And I think it's like coming down the stairs, and I'm just going to put my leg out and step down on the floor. And so as I'm tumbling, I kind of do some strangeness in my body physics where I right myself and I'm coming down, and if I had put both feet out and kind of did this, I might have survived it. But I put one leg out like I was stepping, and my leg snapped right here. And the scar is still there, right? The scar is still, there's the scar. I don't know if you can see it, but it's right here, right there. Anyway, and so what happened was my leg snapped and the bone shot out. It was called a compound fracture. So my foot was going 90 degrees this way, and this part of my leg was going up that way. And the bone from down here was sticking straight out all kind of jaggly, and the blood was coming out. And Richard Lasco came over to me, and he was looking at it, and the blood was coming out, and my leg was like that, and the bone was sticking out there. And Richard, I could still hear it. And that's so cool. Look at that. And he came up, and he touched the bone. And you know that picture that Da Vinci, had where God and man are touching their fingers? It was just like that. Richard touched that bone, and it was like a shock. And I was unconscious. I did not come back to consciousness until like a day and a half later when I was in a hospital, and I had a cast, from the tip of my toe up to my hip. And, I was in this bed, and my leg had all these pillows, and I had this cast, and they kind of had me kind of harnessed into the bed, so I couldn't really move. I could move the top of my body. I could like reach for a cup or hit the button or do something. But, and pretty much from my diaphragm to my toes, I couldn't feel anything below. Nothing. And when I came to, there was a nurse there going, "Oh, you've come back. How are you feeling?" I said, "Okay." She goes, you need something here? Drink a little water. I had a straw and a sippy cup. She was really nice. And I was in a room all by myself, nice sunlight. And I go, "So what happened?" She goes, "Well, you had a really bad accident. And you had what we call compound fracture. But you were amazingly lucky." I said, "Really? Why?" She goes, "Well, one thing, you went into shock and you were unconscious for the whole thing, so you felt nothing. And so you didn't do physical moving around that would have made it worse. And that the ambulance that got you came from a hospital that just put in a operating room to deal with severe car crashes. And the doctor who invented a process that puts bones together was here giving a course on how to do it. And when they rolled you in, he said, this guy is the perfect example of this process. And you had a doctor that invented the process, showing and being assisted by some of the best surgeons in this region, working. They just happened to all be here and happened to, and the other amazing thing was the fracture you had was amazingly severe, but you didn't break any arteries. Your blood flow was perfect. And when they stuck the bones together, they came together perfectly. There was no shattering, just snapped. And they put your back together, and they said it was the most cleanest kind of break, and that it was this jaggedy thing. It enabled the marrow and the bone to heal much better. And the doctor said that break will be stronger than the rest of the bone after it heals. The only thing is you're going to have to be in this position for at least 6 weeks, and then you're going to have this crazy cast on your leg for the next 6 months. But after that, you'll be fine. And I said, I can't feel anything below. I said, right. They did a kind of, neural tap to disconnect so you wouldn't move around, right? And they had a thing up my butt and a thing up my urethra. And I had about 6 weeks in the hospital there. And it's not that bad. That these nurses were really sweet and nice and gave me because this was a new unit in this hospital. They had a staff and they had nobody in it but me. They had no other, amazingly terrible accident happen for at least a few weeks because they hadn't really opened it up completely. But because all those people were there and I was the best example, they did me. And they put me in there and I had my own room and, it was quite nice. A lot better. The food was better. The attention was better than me living at home with my feral wolf family. So, that's the opportunity. See, a lot of people, oh, that's a catastrophe. Yes, I still have the scar on my leg, and it's like a barometer. When the weather changes severely, that part of my leg I can tell what's going to happen, But everyone could go, oh, that's terrible. Oh, my life sucks. So, from that point on, I know a lot of people who've had, as children, things, like the braces or zits, or had a lot of kids have hernias. There are a lot of things. I had a lot of things in my lungs. My lungs are, this whole thing that happened, why my voice is the way it is and why my lungs are still hacking up. I'm actually hacking shit up from birth to 10 years old, when my lungs were every year on my birthday, I would get pneumonia or strep throat or tonsillitis or whatever. So we can either take things as an opportunity, and what's coming down the pike for our culture, our society, is, as you heard Chris talk about, pretty freaking amazing. And, but you can either take that as an opportunity or, or not. Okay, let's see. Here's another interesting one. You watch this guy. This is about Agenda 21.
He's the author of Technocracy News and Technocracy Rising. He's also got a new book that's going to be coming out, and he is going to be at the Red Pill Expo, which I'm going to leave information for that below. That's something that I'm even thinking about attending, but it's there in Bozeman, Montana in June 23rd and 24th. Great event to get tickets at. All kinds of speakers. I know you're going to be there. But Pat, would you just tell them a little bit about who you are, what you do, and some of the speakers at the expo?
Well, absolutely. I've been tracking globalization for over 40 years now, if you can believe it. You can see the gray hair that I've got. I earned that along the way. And I started out writing years, like in the 1970s, with the late Professor Anthony Sutton. That's where I got my start on tracking the Trilateral Commission, the New International Economic Order, the New World Order, and things like that. And here we are all this time later. Now I discovered a few years ago historic technocracy, which ties into my original studies with the Trilateral Commission. And, it's expanded my horizon significantly, let me put it that way. And so I'm trying to connect the dots with people. That's why I write my website, technocracy.news. It's a journal of stories from around the world that pertain to technocracy. And my book, Technocracy Rising, of course, connects all the dots between the original iteration of the Trilateral Commission and everything that we see going on today with the United Nations, for instance, Sustainable Development, 2030 Agenda, the New Urban Agenda. It never stops, it seems like. But these are critical stories that are missing the headlines. As you know, they need to be discussed in public. And I really thank you for your willingness to kind of put this stuff out on the table. People need to understand what's going on.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of the times the stuff at the United Nations gets ignored. You're never going to see it in the mainstream media. And it's something that really needs to be talked about. Pushing, like you said, the globalist agenda in our school systems, and starting, from babies on up, if you will, until they're here, until they're brainwashed to think that, George Orwell 1984 mentality. Now, can you tell me what are some of the latest United Nations agendas that are going ignored? We know there's 17 goal agenda, but what are some of the things that are happening right now that are getting overlooked in the mainstream media?
The biggest thing that I see, the big picture, is that there was three major events at the United Nations that were orchestrated together. They weren't just independent things. Like, for instance, the climate change agreement in Paris in 2015. That was one thing. But right before that, you had the 2030 Poverty Agenda Conference in September. And then last year, you had the Habitat 3 conference in Quito, Ecuador. These three, and that produced the new Urban Agenda document. These three events were orchestrated, I call it a troika. They were orchestrated together to push forward to the next 10 to 15 years to transform the world. Deep transformation, they call it. Basically, they're re-engineering society. They're re-engineering our cities. They're re-engineering our rural areas. Actually, all the people that think they're safe, that moved to the rural, out in a rural house somewhere. I wish that was me, but they're all going to be assigned to a global, to a city, and they will fall under all the regulations and all the rules and stuff that they're going to put in place. And the United Nations is just racing right now to make this stuff happen and put this agenda into effect, especially in light of the populism movement around the world, like in our country and in Europe, they're experiencing it as well. The United Nations is racing to implement all of their agendas. And it's not just one agenda. You can't say, well, it's Agenda 21. It's much bigger than that now. It's comprehensive. It's pervasive. It's the worst case of crabgrass your lawn ever had. And it's spreading throughout the world.
Now, I've read a couple of sites. I think it's called America 2050, where they show everyone merged into these mega cities. I think they had 11, if I'm quoting that right, but 11 different mega cities that they want to push people into. And like you said, they do plan on assigning us to certain cities. Now, with Donald Trump in office, I know he's talked about cutting the funding to the UN, though it hasn't officially been done, or at least widening the burden there.
Well, you get the picture, right? So this is what a hidden hand is doing, This is what the powers that shouldn't be are at. This is what the sock puppets, who are purchased, who take to the envelope. There isn't a single politician who isn't owned, isn't controlled. Donald Trump, he was put in power. He didn't win, The one interesting thing was, and this is part of love's co-creation, the thing that's outside of most of the hidden hands point of view is because they are totally controlled by their ego. They are so full of themselves, they can't see what is known as the unexpected consequence. Now, I used to get paid. I mean, there was within the construct of the hidden hand, the powers that shouldn't be, there were a number of smart folk, and not only smart folk, good people who were in deep in that scene, trying to do the right thing, and they would hire me because I was the one person that was because of my naivete and ego was ego, I was a semi-uncorruptible, meaning, hey, I loved hedonism. I mean, when I worked for the Desperate Lawyers for 10 years, I kind of dove in that swimming pool of hedonism. I mean, that's why I gained 200 pounds. That's why I died in a plate of spaghetti. But when I went to the other side and my masters were there greeting me with balloons and, hey, you did a good job, kid, but you got to go back. Don't you want to finish what you started? Don't you want to complete rather than having to go back into the wearing blender of karma and come out something else, And they were right. So that's why I came back, And it does get a little frustrating when, I've died so much. I've so mistreated my body. You youngsters, take care of that mud puppet, Every bone that I've broken a lot of them. They all healed up, but boy, do they hurt now. Look at my lungs. This happened to me when I was born up until the age of 10, and it's still affecting me. So, but it's like I'm cleaning all this stuff out. It's painful, and that's why people don't do it. That's why people don't face their issues. They hide. they self-medicate. They, why do people hoard? Why was I a hoarder? Because I was, hiding from, oh, I got to take care of this. I really didn't want to. So, you know, I dove into the pool of hedonism and became a hoarder and had a lot of stuff and things and tried to, but I was awake enough to know that this ain't gonna really work. So that's why I never stopped being your Sensei Al Bob. I mean, I was Sensei Al Bob when I was working in for 30 years in the scholastic universe, being a scholar. Now, most of my people around me were all wanting to be scholastics, wanted to be tenured professors, wanted that safety net. I knew it didn't exist. I was more interested in the adventure and the things I could learn, right? So that's why I did that. And it gave me a freedom, When I lost my second wife, I didn't really want to be tied down. And it gave me a freedom where I could access all kinds of things, information, resources, and people. There were tons of people. I could have fun little, one reason I became MT volunteer fireman because the firehouse was 85% women, all very attractive between the ages of 21 and 35. And they were all adrenaline junkies. And our house, basically 5 times a week, we'd scrape people off the highway. It was this place where 2 interstates, instead of having a clover leaf, the highways just did that. So big trucks would run over little cars. So we were always, and we saved a lot of people's lives. And that's a real, to get them out of a crushed car in one piece into the ambulance, stabilized, and off to the emergency room. That was a big charge. And these girls would get high on their adrenaline. And so when we get back in the house, we would have wild parties. So that was kind of fun for, I had, those girls were really my best friends. We had, platonic sex, we weren't looking for our twin flame, someone to no, we were having a good time. I decked out the, our house like a disco, we had a bunch of mirrored balls because I still had a lot of disco accoutrement left. I still do. I still have a couple of mirrored balls. Anyway, and that was fun. And I served people. And I've saved, in that 3 year, I must have saved 500 people's lives, right? And at least 100 people who died getting to the emergency. Meaning, once we got there and we found them and we were getting them out, we knew the odds of them surviving to the operating room was slim, but we still did it because a good 30% of the people that we just gave up, I'll let them die now, they'd be saved. A good 30% of those people who should have died, we'd get back there. And my job, after we got them in the bus and got them stabilized, and there was really not much we could do except hold their hand. I was the guy holding their hand. The others were doing all kinds of other things. And I was, my training, my skill set, my bag of tools, other than being an EMT and a strategist. And I was the guy who did, in an accident, I was the person who figured out, what's the word when they figure out who gets worked on first? It starts with a T. But anyway, those were my skill sets. I drove one of the trucks because I lived across the street from the firehouse. That's one job I had. I'd be the first guy to stick my head into the car to find, because I was still pretty thin then and could fit in there. And I could, through my training in Eastern medicine, I could not just take their blood pressure and their pulse. I could take all of their other pulses and see how all of the other parts of their body was working. I could do cranial sacral on them. And my chief and my lieutenant and the rest of the crew understood because I used to give everybody a massage. I moved my massage table into the house and I would work on everyone. That's, why everybody loved me, because I could make them feel really good. So, and I could do that to the person um, in that, I could calm them down. I could make them feel as best as I could. I could get them out of being on the edge of, because the thing that would kill most people, or that kills most people in a catastrophe like that, is their shock. When they go into shock, your body kind of shuts down. So I could keep people from, going into shock. So, I gave myself a thing of service to take away from the hole that was missing in my heart from the loss of my second wife and other disappointments of my parents crushing my soul and, cheating me and lying and stealing, things like that. And other, and my exposure to institutions that were basically, when I worked at the UN and saw that, hey, they put me in charge of this NGO of alternative technologies, and I went at it. I showed that simple things, we could make a big difference. They didn't want to make a big difference. They wanted to build a world entity that could control the population and kill 90% of them. They didn't want to save them. So, let's see. Wonders of Spartans, right? To Amazon. Yeah, Amazons. Yep. By matriarchy. Yep. Pre-flood. Yep. Yep. Venus, the goddess. I love her. What the heck? Codex. Yep. Yep. It's about nutrition and Agenda 21. Yep. Need me some. Yep. Yep. Teas are the best. I'm a big tea guy. Anyway, so I think this little chat is, you get the picture, right? There's a lot of information out there. My playlist has a lot of stuff that will lead you into other things. But instead of getting morose like Chris Hedges, that's probably not even the right word. Because Chris comes from a very, his his master's degree is in theology. He was going to be, I think his father was a Methodist minister. He was heading in that direction. But he realized that his real calling was to inform people about what's going on. But he has to, instead of putting a belief structure into it, he has to go to where he was in his theologic state, looking at, the artist in the first person, looking at love's co-creation, being part of that, being the cadre of love's co-creation. And that's what we're here to do. That's why I started Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Al Bob, to be your griot, tell you the story. So, anyway, I've talked now for an hour and 3 minutes and 33 seconds. I will kind of sign off when we hit 1111111, which will come quick. And I probably won't do anything tonight, but I'll try and do something tomorrow, like after 1 p.m. Okay? So what else do you guys need to say? Thank you, Jade. Thank you, Dragon. Thank you, the other two people who are there but haven't said anything. And remember to meditate. Go back. Like last night's meditation was a nice one. Check that out. Again, get other people to subscribe to become part of the cadre. It'd be nice to get over 300. We're getting close. It'd be nice to get to 1,000. Be nice if we got more thumbs up there. And again, I urge you all to go on the channel and download all these things. Dragon has done a really good job of doing that. And I would love it also if you guys could take these shows. Any of you ever watched that show, Science Fiction Theater 2000 or 3000 or whatever it is, where they had this guy like me and then these Muppet puppets making fun of the 1950s sci-fi movies. And I think that would be really good if they were like shadow puppets in front and making fun of, or maybe not making fun, but making commentary on what I'm saying, like you do over here in the chat. So I give you total permission to do whatever the heck you want with all this stuff. Just spread it amongst the digital divide, get it out there. Oh yeah, it's going to affect the elites. But see, their egos are so, like I said, I was at the UN in the mid '70s when I came back from New Mexico and was like, had all my chakras opened up by, Grandfather David, one of the elders of the Hopi, truth keepers. And, he put me through a 30-year, what would take most people 30 years. It took him 4 months. I mean, every friggin' night. I mean, at least once a week, we would do a ceremony. I'll leave you with this little story. The most interesting ceremony they put me through. I mean, we did all kinds of sweats and all kinds of things. But we did this thing called the drum ceremony. And it was Friday, I was living in his house, and I got there, and his buddies, they were all old guys, were waiting for him. They had the pickup truck full of stuff, camping gear. We're gonna go out, and so they took me out, way out in the deepest mesa, way out, way past. There was nobody around, no white people, no several, no, no highways, no power lines. I mean, it was like being out in the West 1,000 years ago, and we stopped at a site that was obviously been camped at before, and because there was a fire circle there, and there was a place for a sweat, and there was, and they pulled everything out, set it all up, and so we did a sweat, and I was basically naked. Still a chunk down there from 6 years old. Got it. Anyway, we come out of sweat, and I didn't quite have a vision, but I was in state, that's for sure. And so they said, put on your boots, your socks. And I said, okay. And I had like, shorts on, but nothing else. And wounded deer and elk and Grandfather David took me up this mountain, and it had a really pretty interesting path. And they said, okay, you go in front of us and just go where, it takes you. And by this time, a front was moving in. And it was not quite summer, but right about now, May. And it was a Friday, a weekend. And so we're going up there, and this cold it dropped 30 degrees. It was probably 70 when we started going up that hill, and it dropped down to 40, 70, 60, down to 40-ish. And very close, but like on the other side of the mesa, a big, the sun had already kind of gone down, and the moon was like way over there, hadn't really risen, but it was enough to illuminate. And this big black cloud had covered up the moon, and it was coming in from the direction. And in the big black cloud, you could see lightning. And you could hear it. And it was, 20, 30, 40 miles away. You could see the flash, and then 1,000, 2,000. So we're still going up. So, we get to a place where I'm about 15, 20 feet in front of them, and I'm kind of crawling up, and it's getting to a place where it's no longer this, it's kind of like that, and I'm climbing up, and I get to a place that there's a little outcropping of a rock, that's like maybe 5 feet this way and about 6 feet this way, and relatively comfortable. And the outcropping, there was a little bit of a, you could sit back in here, and there's a little bit kind of protecting over your head. I mean, if any rocks, you couldn't get hit in the head. If anything was kind of falling from, but it didn't look like there was any loose stuff up there. But anyway, I kind of get to this place, and you get to this place. There's really, because you'd have to crawl up and around this little ledge that was above, and there was no place to go this way. And going down, coming up it was one thing, but looking down, it looked like it was a cliff. So I was at a place where I really couldn't go any far, and they were about 10, 15 feet behind me. These guys are pretty old guys. They're in their 70s, 80s, and they all kind of had biggish packs. And Grandfather David kind of pops his little head up, and elk and deer come, pop their little heads up, and they kind of throw their backs up off their backs like here. And in one of these big packs, there is a actual buffalo skin. And I'll put that around you. So, I put it down, sat down on it. It was nice and comfy, and kind of went right over my head and pretty covered me up. And I left the furry part that I sat on and the skin part out, right? And then in one of the other things, David pulled out all of this wood, like twigs, nice dried. Right? And he said, push that bag behind you, keep it dry, close it over. So he built some nice little pile, had some paper in there, puts it underneath, and he takes out of his can of magic. And I remember the first time we started a fire out in the middle of nowhere. Is how we going to start a fire. And it was raining. It hadn't quite started raining yet, but you could tell something was coming. And so he, opens his can, and it's sawdust with gasoline. And he kind of sprinkles it on the paper and the wood and hits it with a butane lighter. He used to call it buffalo fart magic stick. And he says, just keep taking dry wood and feeding that fire. Don't let the fire go out. Okay. And he goes, so, we're all going to sit here for a second. And Deer pulls out his little drum like this. And it goes, boom, 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 boom. And they're like doing the kettle drum thing, all three of them, boom, boom, boom. And they said, get into that sound. That's your heart. Feel the heart drum. That's a heart drum. This little heart drum. Boom, 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 boom. And they start singing. And I'm kind of going into state. I'm seeing myself as, and Elton John did an album called Indian Sunset. It's a song, Man Across the Water, and the song was Indian Sunset. And go listen to that album, because I don't know if he had made it before then, but that's what, as I was walking to see my elder, with the smell of wood smoke burning, my, and my squaw down. And that was like going on in my head. I mean, I saw the picture of these guys 20 generations ago, before the white man showed up, and the buffalo were everywhere, and they're hitting the drum, and I'm seeing that, right? And so I really just kind of go back into that thing, and the fire is just heating me up very nicely. I kind of got it opened up, so the fire is like warming me, and it gets colder and colder. And David said, okay, stay here until we bring you down. And I kind of come back out of state and say, stay here. And he says, yeah. And the other thing, there's a little bit of food and a little bit of water. That's all you'll need. Just there's enough wood there. Just keep that fire going. Just keep it until it's time to come down. And that usually meant when you had a vision, when it changed you, when your, third eye was opened, when and that's what I try and do with you guys when we do guided meditation. I try to open you up. So there I was up there, and they go down. Now I'm watching them go down, and they kind of skip down there, they didn't look like 80-year-old guys. They kind of skipped down there, and so I need some of these guys. Fisherman's friends. Their weapons of corpse drops. The best. Anyway, so I'm up there. I'm sure as I get down, and they're really down there. They're like, that hill, we went up about somewhere between them. Kind of like half a mile up that, if not a mile. And I see them go, they got a small, like I said, they just skip down the hill. They go into the tent, and deer starts to build up the fire in front of the tent. And they had a tarp. So even if you sat around the fire, you're not going to get wet. He sat there with his drum and did the heartbeat. Anyway. Yeah. Yep, that's a tough one. Ecstatic, yep. So I covered up by the blanket and the fire. And in about 5 minutes, once the guys went in the tent and deer is playing the drum, storm hits me full force. Luckily, it's coming straight at me and not like sideways or blowing me that way. But I'm having to really push myself in the back of that rock because it's coming straight at me and it's kind of doing this. And it's blowing the fire off the hook of the thing. I'm having to grab it with my hands to pull it into me. And it starts, first sleeting, then icing, and then hitting me with hail, and it's snowing. Snowing. And it's starting to pack up around me, and luckily I have this big buffalo skin over me, and it's covering the skin. Everything's covered in ice, and but I went into state, and I went back to being an Indian warrior. Not a warrior, just an Indian, like my age, and I was feeling all the things. I was feeling all my relations, all the animals, all the folks in my clan, everyone and everything. And I just went deeper and deeper in that. And I mechanically, kept feeding the fire, drinking water. And I became part of the storm, part of the snow, part of the ice, part of everything. To the point where I wasn't scared to think of death. I just thought of love, all that I loved. And so before I knew it, and what was really amazing, the lightning was I was like in the lightning. And what was interesting was, I kind of somewhat understood that lightning doesn't come from above, it comes from down up. And because I read Franklin's thesis on electricity, and Morey's thesis on electricity, and Tesla's ideas of kinetic energy and the ether. So I was seeing all of that, and I was part of the lightning. I was part, so when I take you into state and I talk about the prana, energizing our blood with photonic light, that's where I found that. That's where I saw that the first time in my life. I mean, really saw it and internalized it and brought it into my cellular structure and watched the mitosis of the cells and the mitochondria being energized by it. Because it was like right in front of me. And it got so loud, so strong, that it was no longer, coming at me or doing something to me. I was part of it. I was in it. I was, there. And that's when time and space disappeared, right? And I kept fleeting. Like the movie would go, all my past lives were just the turn of the page, just like I show you in the Akashic Record, and you move your fingers across the gold edge like a mouse. I was seeing, and it was just very similar. If you ever watched the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's film, and Dave kind of goes through that, all the flashing lights and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of, what you experience when you die or when you illuminate your conscious free will. They're both the same kind of thing. Because when you die, you're just, leaving the mud puppet into another state, either a higher conscious state or into the wearing blender of karma and pop out as another mud puppet. So, I was experiencing all of that, and I lost all sense of time and space and you name it. But I could still, all during this whole thing, the one thing that was holding me back, holding me to my present state at that place, was deer playing the drum. I mean, this amazing, thunderstorm, and I was in the middle, and I could still hear the drum. And it's a little drum. He's a mile down there, and he's like going like this. It's just boom, 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 boom. I could hear it in my heart. You feel that connection. And every so often I would flash down into the tent where all the other guys were, and they were playing cards, drinking, smoking. And it was like, and I kept seeing them there, and I kept seeing that image of the dogs playing cards that are on that. And all of this stuff was just flashing. Past lives, the dogs, the guys, the harp drum, the lightning, And then this tremendous crash right on me. A lightning bolt, bango, right there. I mean, I was blinded. I was knocked back. I mean, it like, but, the gigantic skin I was in protected me. And the explosion basically blew the fire out. And I had one bottle of water right there and one orange. But all the other packs, everything other than me and the buffalo skin was blown away. And I could feel real heat, not coming from the fire, but from the energy of that lightning bolt that hit nearby or right on me or where it, but it was like, whoa. And I kept my arms inside the buffalo. I didn't put them out there. Man, I could sense they burned my hands off. Like I was in there. And then all of a sudden, and I was blinded by that flash of light. And I kind of, just like when I lead you into your imaginary mirror, I went into my imaginary of that bright light, and I went into my Akashic record. I had been taken there before by my other teachers who showed me how to meditate, my sensei and Madam Olga Kluver and Billy Kluver and a number of other great teachers I had showed me how to meditate. But this was a kind of, say, self-motivated, or my conscious free will brought me into state, not the training I had with my other teachers. It was like, and that's what I'm trying to get you guys to do, is to do this on your own. Yes, I can, you know, bring you in a guided meditation in there and show you things. You know? So I go into that state, and I was frozen. It was timeless. You know, it's, you know what it was like? You know, when Dave goes and he comes out and he's in that bedroom, and really, you know, there's nobody there with him, and he's the only guy making any noise. I wasn't even making any noise, but it was like I was in that white room. That's the amazing thing of you know, that movie, because I don't know how that guy does it, but everything he does cinematographically represents so much deeper, you know. Anyway, so I was there for an unknown amount of time, and then what happened was I was in that whiteness, and it kind of, it's like taking gauze off my eyes, and when I could see again, the black cloud was there. There was no more snow or rain or sleet, and there's no more lightning, but that black cloud was like all around me. But straight in front of me, right, you know, 40 miles where that mesa started, there was an orange line of the sun. And the sun, you know, that cloud was there, and the sun was coming up, and the space between the tops of the mountains and the tops of the clouds was this open blue sky, and the sun was coming straight into my eyes. And I kind of came awake, and I could hear all of the old guys down below drumming on Deer's little heart drum, and they were singing. And now they're a mile away, and they're not screaming, but I can hear their singing in my heart. A drum and their singing is in my heart. And I hear Grandfather David said, "All right, you can come down." And he said, "You can leave the skin up there. Just, you know, come down safely, you know, and don't worry about it. You know, you saw us skip down the mountain, so, you know, you are now able to skip down the mountain." And instead of walking backwards, I stood up, I stepped off that thing and walked. And it was like this, and I kind of walked down that, and then that, and then came them, and they had slapping me on the back, and they said, "Oh, you did a great job." You know, they gave me a shot of schnapps, right? And they pulled out another blanket and wrapped it around me because it was still pretty cold, and they had the fire going, and they had me breakfast. So they gave me, you know, bacon, hardtack, eggs, and biscuits that they had baked, coffee, and we went back to meditating after breakfast. Then we went and sweated, and when we sweated, we they all experienced what I had experienced. We did it together. And it was like what I try and ask you guys when we go to states. So what did you experience? What did you do? How do you feel? And you guys are somewhat reticent in saying anything. But anyway, so that was that. So I think I'm going to, it's at 1 hour, 30 minutes and 30 seconds, which will be in about a minute or two. I'm going to say goodnight because my throat and lungs are a bit need to rest. And you don't really realize how much your lungs have to work to speak, but they do. So, yeah, I can see a time before I was Matrix. Yep. Mm-hmm. Because, see, as I said before, guys, the Big Bang, which is Lucifer's illusion of the material world of the Matrix, that this, with his breaking heaven. That's what made the Matrix, right? I mean, the architect is Lucifer, right? So the and the Big Bang isn't like bang and then everything's moving for the last 16 billion years that way. No, Big Bang is the Alpha and the Omega, and all things are the Alpha and the Omega, beginning and the end, all at the same time. So the Matrix, once it occurred, once Lucifer broke heaven, broke the hegemony of heaven, and put everything in that into the sandbox of this illusion Luciferian world of incandescent light, not photonic light. So the thing is that we've always been, at least these 16 billion years, in Luciferian light, but at the same time, we come from love's co-creation, from that place of photonic light. So we are both experiencing the beginning and the end at the same time. We just have to pop the bubble of the illusion of the material world. And we can only do that through love's co-creation. I'm getting healed. That's what all those coughing is. I'm kicking out the jams. Okay, gang, here we are. 1 hour, 30 minutes, and 30 seconds coming up quick. So I'll try and talk to you tomorrow. Okay? Okay. I love you all. Stay well. Be good.